Welcome everyone. I am so excited today because we have another VIP Pausecast guest in the house. We have Jessca. We have Jessca Grossmeier. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. I didn't even ask, but hi, Jessca. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Hey, nice to be here, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to get into so much, including very similar paths both Jessca and I have held in our world of corporate work and burning out. And there's so many things I feel like you and I have crossed paths, including things like Google. So I want to share a little bit about who you are, and then we'll jump into a pause that you've graciously accepted to lead us in, if that sounds okay. Yeah. All right. So a little bit about Jessca, who and why you're here today. So you are a PhD, MPH, an award-winning researcher. Your book is called Reimagining Workplace Well-being, Fostering a Culture of Purpose, Connection, and Transcendence. Jessca is a leading voice in the workplace well-being world and was recently recognized as one of the most influential women leaders in health promotion. Woo woo, cheering you on there. Your work includes conducting collaborative research, advising, writing, and speaking on topics related to workplace well-being, best practices, measurement, evaluation, strategic planning, and value demonstration. You've got so much to offer us. I just love that. You are a frequent speaker at conferences across the globe, and you serve on several advisory boards devoted to helping employers create a workplace culture that fosters employee well-being. I mean, that is what we're all about here at the Pausecast. So honored to have you here today, Jessca. I can't wait to get into it. Will you now lead us in a pause of your choice? What do you like to do? Help us be with you in any way that feels good.
Well, I incorporate pauses into my day all day long, but this is one that I've been sharing with people because it's made a transformative effect on my life. And this isn't one that I do every day, but it stays with me. And I'll be sharing more after the reflection about that. But I'd like you to tap into your imagination for a moment. And so listeners can feel free to close your eyes if you'd like, or if you prefer to keep your eyes open, consider writing down your reflections as they occur to you. I'm a pen and paper gal, so I tend to like journaling. Do what feels comfortable for you. So imagine for a moment that you've been invited to a fancy dinner party where you are being honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Except this award isn't about the achievements that might be noted on a resume or a social media page. The focus is on how you showed up in the world to make a positive impact on those around you in your immediate life. So picture it. All of the most important people in your life are in attendance at this dinner party. Your mentors, maybe past teachers, coaches, family members, good friends. For this visualization, feel free to include those who may not be an active part of your life today, but have in the past. Who is in attendance around this table? Now, imagine each person stands one by one, and they share with the group a story about how you made a difference in their lives just by your being in the world. What do you hope people will say about you? What did you do or are you doing that contributes to making their lives better in some way? Have you been a role model, a positive support, or an inspiration to them? What do you hope people will say about you? Now consider your life today. What are the activities of daily life? If you looked closely at your life, how you spend your time, how you behave in moment to moment interactions, do they reflect the kinds of things you envision being said about you at the end of your life. If you had to put a number between 1 and 10 on the level of alignment that you have right now in your day-to-day activities with what matters most to you in life, what number would you give it? Assume 1 is little alignment and 10 is perfect alignment. Thank you for joining me in this reflection. And, this kind of reflection can make some of us uncomfortable, but they can also help us to focus more on how what we can do today in this moment aligns with our core values, with our purpose in life, and with an eye to more meaningful connections with our coworkers. Thanks for participating.
Thank you, Jessica. That was a really powerful visualization. And it's so easy to, just in that example, I know for, at least for me, it's so easy to feel super scattered. I know I'll have like a moment where I'm visualizing it, and then like I'm back in some other thought, and then I'm back in it again, and I'm back in another thought. So super powerful to remember our impact, I'd say, and how much we are capable of. So thanks.
Yeah, you bet. And while I give myself right now in this moment an 8 on that alignment scale, because I've managed to pivot my work in alignment with my purpose, I haven't always had a strong sense of purpose. And so if you're curious, I could tell a little bit about my story about how I've used this reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, tell us a little bit about this in service to feeling like you're on the right track, and maybe a little bit about your story. That'd be great.
Yeah. So 10 years ago, I actually had a crisis of purpose in my work. And this was because there were a lot of different organizational and industry factors that were coming together, and it made me feel like I just wasn't making a difference at work. I didn't feel like what I was supposed to be doing every day was actually happening. And that's because there were a lot of barriers and challenges at work that kept me from doing what I felt was important and from feeling effective. And what I know now in hindsight is that 10 years ago at that same time, I was also suffering from burnout. And burnout can actually make us question our purpose in life, because suddenly we ask ourselves, why am I working so hard? What is the point of all of this, right? Like, does it all even matter? And for a long time, months and months and months, I woke up every day wanting to quit my job. I would drive to work and I would just be like, oh dear God, just let it end. And that's when I took a step back and thought about, well, what matters most to me in life? If I could do anything I wanted to do, what would I even be doing? And one of the things I realized is it wasn't necessarily that I was in the wrong job, although the organization was making it very difficult for me to be effective. But what I realized is that my relationships at work were the problem. You see, as I had worked my way up to a leadership position in this organization, I found myself feeling less and less like I could be my true self at work. I felt like I had to act like a leader all the time. And that created a lot of distance between me and my coworkers. And after a while, I felt like I was just showing up and people only appreciated me for what I could do for them, not necessarily for me. And I was like, if I wasn't here tomorrow, would people even notice? Would they even care, except for the fact that I wasn't doing what they needed done, right? Like, did they care about me as a person? And so once I came to that realization, I started to imagine, well, what would it look like to have deeper relationships with coworkers? And I started to think about my core values. And this is where I landed on, eventually, it took not a day or even a week, it took actually years of reflection on my core values to come up with the purpose statement. My purpose in life is to love well, live generously, and serve others. But at the time, even though I didn't have that purpose statement to ground me each day like I do now, I still thought about, well, what would it look like for me to be a more positive influence on those around me? No matter what's going on at work, what it throws at me that day, how could I be a more positive influence on others' well-being every day at work, no matter what happens? And to really focus on shifting my relationships from just this high level of professionalism and respect to one that was more, people, I actually felt like I knew people and they knew me for who I was. And so I shifted away from an achievement orientation and more towards a service orientation. And without quitting my job, this made all the difference for me because it helped me to get back to a place of personal and professional thriving without necessarily changing the circumstances of my job. And I think a lot of people are in that place today where they're like, hey, I can't quit my job. I can't take a long pause. Although I did eventually take a sabbatical and we can talk about that. I couldn't then. And so this helped me to reconnect with what was important to me and helped me to find purpose in my everyday work, even when it was really frustrating.
Beautiful. And I think that's our common thread, is that we were working and we were, so you and I had similar stories where we were working and like feeling like for me, I felt like I was just putting on a cloak of like, here's me as a leader and me doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. Meanwhile, I felt like I was super scattered and in fear of feeling like I wasn't doing it right, or that like I just kept getting feedback I wasn't doing right. So I'd work harder, and then I felt less and less on track, if you will. But I love your purpose statement, and that's super beautiful. And yeah, pause is an intentional shift in behavior. So I love that you chose to do that yourself without necessarily shifting your world, and was really the beginning of what it sounds like was your book, Reimagining Workplace Well-being, right? And so that to me is such a testament towards your journey and where you've come from and what you're doing. And tell us a little bit about the book itself, Reimagining Workplace Well-being. I know it's full of things like, how do we find more purpose? How do we build a culture potentially that's going to have alignment and value-based, things like that?
Yeah, so the book actually was not something I set out to write. So back when I was going through that period of burnout, I promised myself someday I was going to take a sabbatical, and I couldn't do it then. I couldn't, I wasn't ready to. But I promised myself someday I would. And so in 2021, it was my 50th birthday, big milestone for a lot of people. And for years I had been socializing this idea with my spouse, with my friends, with my boss, even, that when I turned 50, I was taking a sabbatical. And so I prepared for it, and I was able to do that in 2021. And so I started the year and I said, I don't know exactly what it is, where I'm going to land at the end of the year. But one of the things I do know is that I want to dig into what I'm really curious about. And I held the question for an entire year: if I could do anything that I wanted to in the world, what would it be? And so I started to read and just follow my curiosity. And I just started to notice, what books am I picking up? What am I reading? It was COVID, so my travel plans got totally thrown in the dust, but I could still read. And so I got up every day. I did my spiritual well-being and grounding practices. And then I would read and I would reflect and journal and go for long walks. And what I began to realize during this time is that the things that were really helping me to feel like I had a sense of well-being, and what I was leaning into, were having a sense of purpose in this world and being able to connect to that every day, no matter what our circumstances, to be able to have meaningful relationships, and then to connect with something bigger than ourselves. And as I started to dig into the research on this, I started to realize, this isn't something that we talk about when we talk about workplace well-being. A lot of wellness initiatives focus on physical activity and nutrition and good sleep, which is all really important, but it wasn't addressing these areas. And so the book I eventually ended up writing at the end of that year was about how the workplace can address these practices and bring purpose, connection, and transcendence into our everyday work. And I came to that realization because I was able to do it for myself. And I started to think about, well, there are a lot of ways organizations can actually support people in this work. They're just not doing it. And I came across thousands and thousands of research studies on workplace spirituality. And I'm like, I gotta make people aware of this. So that's what ended up with me writing this book.
Workplace spirituality. And I remember you and I, we've known each other for a few years. And I know that a few of my podcast episodes have been along these same lines of, how do you get out of the spiritual closet at work, or what's your SQ, your spiritual quotient, right? Like your IQ or your EQ. And I think I agree. I feel like this has been left out of the equation at work, and that's the gap we feel. Like there's just this purposelessness or a void of thinking it's just to go out there and achieve whatever the goals and potential short-term goals for a company might be. So I love your approach, and I think that that's really, really powerful because we need it. We need it. And I think everyone listening here, there's a resonance there, right? If that's something that resonates with you, my sense is you're in the right place, because all of us can, I think, do things in a way that serve us at work so that we can feel more purposeful like you and have a purpose statement. And it doesn't need to be this lofty big thing outside ourselves. It can be something that really resonates with us and feels like it's in alignment to get us to our next level. And I love what you said earlier about the how is what changed. It wasn't necessarily the job. And I agree with you. Like a lot of us just aren't in a predicament to switch it up and go on a long-term break. Unfortunately, there's these forced pauses right now, like you know about in the tech world, and other fields too, where there is a forced pause where you literally are needing to reassess where you go next based on potentially like a layoff or something that you're in early retirement or who knows, things like that. So do you, and now like basically going back to your book and some of the things that you talk about in there, what can we do you know, to create this world of potentially like alignment and feeling spiritually aligned at work? Like what if I don't even know where to start, you know, can you tell us a little bit about how to assess that if I'm interested to maybe bring more of that to myself at the job, or what can be done differently?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, and myself included, when I was first exposed to purpose work very early in my career, I was lucky enough to have an organization that supported my personal and professional growth. And so I was exposed to purpose work, but I was misled into thinking that, well, you know, I have to find a job and that has to be how I live out my purpose. That isn't necessarily true. I have family members who are in the manufacturing industry. They live out their purpose every single day. It has nothing to do with what the job is. It's about how they approach their work, about how they show up in the lives of their coworkers. And in some ways, they're able to meet some of their purpose outside of work. But I think all of us can connect to our values and what's important to us. And when I think about spiritual practices, I think about those, I define those as those that help us to connect at three different levels. One is, how do we connect more deeply with ourselves? So, like the reflection in the beginning, what matters most to me? What do I value? And then once I know that, how do I allow that awareness to influence my day-to-day actions? And so I start every day with journal pages, and I reflect on my calendar, and I look at my calendar and I look at my purpose and I think, where are my opportunities to live this purpose out? And if I'm not going to work that day, you know, who am I interacting with in my life? How can I do that? And what I love about my new purpose statement, love well, live generously, and serve others, I can do that anywhere, while I'm driving in traffic, while I'm doing takeout, while I'm at the grocery store, or while I'm at work, right? And so we have to start to imagine, how can I live up my values in these different areas? Second, how are we connected with those around us? How can we turn our attention outwards to express care and support and service for others? Because, you know, even when you look at Maslow's work and self-actualization, it's not just about how can I fill myself up, it's how can I fill myself up so that it overflows and I can serve other people. And so that's why self-care is so important. We need to fill our own cup so that we overflow and are operating out of a place of generosity and not out of a place of scarcity. And so then the third area of connection is, how do we connect with something bigger than ourselves? And this could be a social cause, nature, or a belief in a higher power. So this is where, if you've got a faith tradition, it can inform all three of these areas of connection, but it isn't a requirement. And I think that's one of the reasons why workplaces haven't embraced the spiritual dimension of well-being. They've thought, well, that's religion, we don't want to touch that, that's scary. And there are actually a lot of organizations that are addressing this, but they're coming at it with an openness of, you get to define what grounds you in these three ways. And if that's faith tradition, great. You can bring that into the conversation, but respect that not everybody has that and believes the same things as you do. So how do we create mutual respect and regard for one another? And there's no right answer, right? We're all coming to these areas of connection in different ways and at different points.
I love that. So there's like these different facets to think about, and I agree with everything you're saying. I think the purpose statement and knowing purpose can be at any time, any place, I feel like is a huge breakthrough when you get that. And clearly that's been something that you're able to do, and very powerful, because I think I think many of us think, well, what do I do outside of whatever you're working on, whether it's the job, maybe you're a mom, maybe you're a parent or a partner for someone. So we're like, oh, but I need more. I need a purpose that feels really lofty, or like this super achiever part of me. But the reality is, and I agree 100%, is that it's who you are moment by moment, and that defines how you can be. But it can serve and guide you to live life in a way that feels very fulfilling. And that's the how that you're sharing, right?
Yeah. And I think and you talk about this in your work quite a bit, Rachel, but how do we change the scorecard for what successful means, right?
How do we change the scorecard? Tell us how it goes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Give us the formula. I know.
Yeah. And I continue to think deeply about that every day. It's not like I've figured it all out. There's still, our ego still wants us to achieve things, right? And our ego selves are all about protecting us and grooming us for survival, right? And so it wants us to achieve things, and so we need to pay attention to that. But we don't need to make that our whole scorecard, right? Yes, it's okay for me to have goals and what I hope to achieve, but it can't be the whole scorecard. At the end of my life, am I going to care about how many studies I published, or how many conferences I spoke at, or how much money I make? Probably not. What I'm going to care about are, have I contributed in meaningful ways? Am I reconciled in all the relationships in my life? That's really what I'm going to be thinking about is, how have I left things?
Exactly. Yet, we get so mired up in the day to day of like, oh, and I do this myself. Like, I'm 100% guilty of being like, where's this gonna, like, where am I gonna get the money for this? And like, how do I create value, but also make sure that I have food on the table? Like it's easy to, I think, get sidetracked, but to keep that bigger eye on the prize, as I would say, in perspective, is super important, which, brought me back to your exercise in the beginning. Yeah. So let's see. I'm curious. I know you do a lot of speaking and you work with a lot of companies and consult with them. What do you think are some, like, knowing what what are some trends, or what would you say are some ways that companies can start to think about this in a different way to feel more in alignment with individuals, so that their scorecard is more well-rounded, or that wellness is at a place that feels like it's doable and helpful for others? Do you have any recommendations, or just what you're noticing as you've worked with many different companies, what's working well?
Yeah. So thank you for the question, Rachel. A lot of companies are looking to double down on their investment in well-being. As they're looking at the trends, they realize, taking care of employees is part of now the expectation, especially our younger workers. They're coming in and saying, I want more in this employment contract, right? I want to experience more in a fuller life. And, when employees do that, or when employers support people in these paths, these spiritual practices, it actually helps not just foster better relationships and more ethical behavior, but it also improves employee engagement with their work. And so there is a business case for this. And I do talk about that quite a bit in my book. But, what I'm seeing organizations do is they're incorporating some of these supports for purpose, social connection. How do I build social skills into onboarding? They are providing training to every single employee. Bimbo Bakeries is one. They're based in Latin America. And, these are people working in bakeries. They're making bread, right? And they're churning it out and packaging it up and shipping it out. And they do this as part of every single employee's onboarding, not just as part of a leadership development program, which is where purpose often falls, right?
Yes.
And when people are doing well-being initiatives, they're starting to bring kindness and gratitude, mindfulness meditation, all of these things, volunteerism, all of these things are things companies are doing, but they might not be realizing why it's important. And all of these types of activities can help people with their purpose to feel more connected. So there are a lot of ways that companies are already doing this, but they need to be more intentional about making sure they're providing it to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Super powerful. And what I love about what you're saying is that it's doubling down from the business side. And I think from like, what about a company who's not doubling down? I know many people, you probably do too, where they're feeling that loss and lack of purpose because they don't feel valued or seen or heard in their respective companies. So how can someone who's in that boat shift things in that way if there's any influence we can have, or how do we maybe start from the bottom up, like a grassroots thing? But can you do that if you're going against the current in a culture that might not be even aware that those are things that matter? I don't know. What is your take on that?
So I believe, Rachel, that every single person has the ability to make an influence on the lives of others. Maybe it's not getting your C-suite all on board with funding. Let's make this part of onboarding, right? Maybe it's not about let's change our values so we actually think about how we treat one another as humans as part of our corporate values, right? Which many companies are doing, right? From the very top, they're looking at how do we do this big. But if you are in a position where you're like, look, I work for a toxic workplace, they're still not there. So, if you're in that position, I think it starts with us. Each one of us can decide, you know what, I can't change this crazy environment around me, but what I can change is how I show up. And maybe if I start to role model the change I want to see in the world, right? Be the change, Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Embrace that and say, how can I be the change I want to see in the world? And for me, when it came to realizing that my coworker relationships were not what I wanted them to be, days when I was really frustrated, I kept saying to myself, if you want a friend, be a friend. If you want a friend, be a friend. If you want a friend, be a friend. That was like a mantra, but I said over and over and over. And it kept me on track with, well, what could I do to be a friend right now? When I'm ticked off at this person, when I'm frustrated by what's going on, how can I live out my values? And that's something all of us can do. And when any one of us do that, we have no idea what influence that can have on someone else's life, right? You might be the bright spark that gets them back to work the next day, that gives them an uplift in that moment. And when more and more of us begin to do that, we create a ripple effect. So this is a slower change, but I believe change is possible.
Yeah, love that. And be the change is, I'm hearing the big message there. And that's it's such a testament to our own personal power, our own personal influence, that I think we just forget, especially if we're feeling burned out or like we don't matter. And it's not that you don't matter. It's just the choices to say, what could I do differently? And that's the hard part, I think. Like that's like climbing out of the hole of feeling like that desperation when we aren't at the top of our game. And that's such a powerful reminder, Jessca. So thank you for reminding all of us that we can do that. We can be the friend if we want a friend, and that it starts with each of us. Super, super powerful. And just to kind of share, I know we didn't cover any stats, but I talk about this all the time. And I think it's just important. Like, why are we talking about this? And just to give everyone this flavor of where we are in general from the workplace, I want to share a couple stats with you. And you probably even have more, Jessca. These are from your book. We have close to 50 million Americans who resigned from their job 2021, right? There's the pandemic there. 90% of workers are feeling burned out. I say 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 2 in healthcare. And yet there's serious mental health repercussions for this too, including 11% of US adults who have considered suicide in the previous month. I think that statistic is really staggering. And gosh, yeah, I relate a lot to that. Actually, a colleague who literally told me she had suicidal thoughts like a couple months ago, and I was really shocked. I didn't know at all. So this is happening. And as we wrap up here, is there anything else that you would want to share in terms of what we can be aware of and how we can help to shape that culture or show up to feel more purposeful? Anything we just haven't talked about yet?
I think one of the things that we can do is think about how do we structure pauses in our day. So this is a pausecast. So I'm going to endorse pauses.
We're pausing right now. Yay.
Pausing right now. this doesn't have to take, I know that mindfulness practices, meditation practices, 20 minutes twice a day. That's great. I still have not successfully built that into my life, but what can I do? I can take a breath when I've had a hard conversation and reset, right? I can pause before my day begins and think about, with intention, how am I going to show up today? What are where is it going? Where are the rubs going to be?
Yeah.
And what is the intention I can set on how I want to show up that day, no matter what happens. And then at the end of the day, we can reflect back and say, what didn't go as well as I wanted? How can I make it better next time? Like, these are things that we can do, and they can just be moments. They can be during your commute. They can be, take a walk every day for 10 minutes at the end of your day. That's my little reward. When I'm done with all my calls for the day, I will go and take a little celebratory walk, like, yay.
Yay, I'm done.
And I'll think about, well, how did I show up in the ways that I wanted, and what didn't go the way I wanted it to? Because none of us is perfect, right? Like, we're all works in progress. And so I would say, embrace the power of the pause, which is why I love your podcast so much. And I love the tools you make available, Rachel. And, this is stuff that all of us can do in the day-to-day moments. Yeah. We have to weave it in.
We have to. Thank you for bringing the daily pauses in, because they are imperative. They're so critical for our well-being and in service to our doing, as I like to say. So great reminders for breath. The breath is always there. Walking outside is great. You mentioned journaling earlier. That's such a powerful pause, in my opinion. And yeah, you don't need to be a meditator. I mean, these are things that are just, we are increasing that awareness, and they are mindful activities. And meditation's a great start, even if it's, just one breath. I would consider that a mini meditation. So love those that you're bringing in here. And thank you for reminding us. I think that is the work, that is the hard work, where it's so easy to think of it and say, yeah, I know this, like, I can pause in the day. But the reality is, do we do that? And do we not? And then how do we course correct? So thank you for bringing those in and sharing so much with us today, Jessca. I really love your work. It's super, super important, and is very aligned with all of what we're doing here to help people rise to their next level of leadership. Because what you're saying, all of it is really helpful tips and tools that can work. And speaking of tools, where can we find more out about you and what you have to offer?
Yeah, thank you. So if people want to follow me, my only platform right now is LinkedIn. Makes it super easy to find me in one place.
Easy to find you. Love it.
You can direct message me, reach out and connect. And then also my website, jessicagrossmeier.com, super easy place to find me. And you can access free resources that I have on my website. So if you want free resources that can help you in your workplace, and you want to share those with people in HR or benefits, or if you want to access those as a leader and think, how can I incorporate those are on the resources tab on my website. Awesome. And I have a lot more coming in the next month. I just, I have a lot of things I'm thinking about, but I haven't quite put them together. So more coming.
I love it. Right. And that includes your book too, I imagine, the Reimagining Workplace Well-being. So if you are interested to learn more and go deeper, this is such powerful work. Go grab a copy of Reimagining Workplace Well-being by Jessca Grossmeier. And Jessca, thank you so much for being here today. So appreciate your work in the world as well, and keep doing amazing, incredible things. Keep pausing, sister. So great to see you again, and thank you.
Thanks so much. It's so great to be here.